Imagine this. It's Egypt, 1923. A wealthy British lord is dying in his Cairo hotel room. At the very second he draws his last breath, the entire city goes dark. At that same moment, miles and miles away in England, his dog lets out a howl and just drops dead. A coincidence? Or was it something else? Was it the fulfillment of an ancient, terrifying warning? All right, let's dive into one of history's most famous and chilling legends, the curse of King Tutankhamun.
So, this was the line that started it all, the terrifying inscription supposedly carved at the entrance to the tomb. It was a warning that absolutely electrified newspapers across the globe, and it set the stage for a story of supernatural revenge that, honestly, we're still talking about a century later.
Okay, so let's set the scene. The year is 1922. After years and years of digging in the dust, a British archaeologist, Howard Carter, bankrolled by the rich aristocrat Lord Carnarvon, finds the impossible, a nearly untouched tomb of a forgotten pharaoh, King Tut. I mean, this was the single greatest archaeological find in history, and it came at a time when the world was just recovering from a massive war, a world that was absolutely hungry for a little mystery, a little magic. But, almost right away, strange, sinister things started happening.
And it all kicked off with something so simple, a mosquito bite. Lord Carnarvon gets bitten, and a few days later, he nicks it while shaving. That tiny cut leads to a massive infection, and he dies at a very specific time, 1:55 a.m. And then bam, at that exact second, the lights go out all across Cairo, and his dog dies back home. For the public, this wasn't just some tragic series of events, no way. This was the curse in action.
And the creepy thing is, there were signs even before Carnarvon's death. Carter had this pet canary, this little golden bird. Well, one day, his crew finds a cobra, the sacred symbol of the pharaohs, in the canary's cage. It had eaten the bird. The local Egyptians working with him, they saw this as a terrible, terrible omen. The pharaoh's serpent had struck first.
So you take the dramatic death of the expedition's sponsor, you throw in these eerie stories about canaries and cobras, and what do you get? A media firestorm. The world was fascinated with spiritualism and ancient secrets at the time, so the global press just pounced. And just like that, the story was set. A deadly curse was unfolding, and the newspapers were going to be there to count every single body.
And boy, did the headlines get wild. Right after Carnarvon's death, this American financier, George J. Gould, he pays a visit to the tomb. The very next day, he gets a fever and dies. The papers didn't even hesitate. It wasn't just an illness. Nope, it was the pharaoh claiming another victim.
And the list just kept on growing. A British industrialist, Joel Wool, was another visitor who came down with a mysterious high fever right after his trip. And with every death, the legend got stronger, and those headlines, they just got bigger and bolder.
Get this, within just 6 years of opening that tomb, a staggering 22 people who were connected to the excavation, either directly or indirectly, were dead. I mean, the number itself just felt like undeniable proof. How could it not be a curse?
But this was the detail that sealed the deal for most people. The story reached its absolute peak when they finally unwrapped King Tut's mummy. And what did they find? A small lesion on his left cheek, in the exact same spot as the fatal mosquito bite on Lord Carnarvon. For the world, this was the smoking gun, a direct physical link between a 3,000-year-old king and his victim.
Okay, so with 22 deaths, a citywide blackout, and a matching wound on the mummy, it seems like an open and shut case, right? The curse is real. But is that the whole story? Or just maybe, did a perfect storm of coincidence, media hype, and some really bad timing create one of history's greatest myths? Let's start peeling back the layers.
So let's play detective and look at the actual evidence, because it paints a very, very different picture. And we'll start with the very foundation of the curse itself, the chilling warning supposedly found at the tomb's entrance.
Okay, so this is crucial. That famous quote, the whole "death shall come on swift wings" thing, it was completely made up, never existed. Turns out, a reporter had asked Carter's team about any curses, and since they hadn't found any, they just kind of gave him a sly look instead of saying no. And that was all it took. The reporter just invented the story. The world's most famous curse literally began as fake news.
All right, what about all those other spooky events? Well, that Cairo blackout? It turns out power outages were a daily thing back then. The dog Susie? She actually died hours later, not at the same moment, a convenient detail to forget when you account for time zones. As for Lord Carnarvon himself, he was already a sickly man. He came to Egypt for his health. In a world before antibiotics, any infection could be a death sentence. And that matching wound? Yeah, that was a story planted by a rival newspaper that was furious about losing exclusive rights to cover the tomb. So, with all this sensational proof just crumbling away, scientists started to look for more rational explanations for why some people did get sick. And what they found was fascinating, hidden right there in the tombs themselves. Researchers have found that ancient, sealed tombs can be a perfect breeding ground for some nasty, toxic molds, like this stuff, Aspergillus niger. These tiny spores can actually survive for thousands of years, and if you breathe them in, especially if you already have a weak immune system, they can cause some really serious lung infections. Back in the 1920s, with no antibiotics, exposure to something like this could have easily been fatal. And if you want the real nail in the coffin for the curse theory, look no further than a 2002 study in the British Medical Journal. They basically put the curse to a scientific test. They tracked 44 Westerners who were in Egypt for the discovery, 25 who actually went inside the tomb, and 19 who didn't. The result? Absolutely no statistical difference in how long they lived. In fact, the people who went into the tomb lived to be 73 on average, which is pretty darn good for that era. But honestly, the single most powerful piece of evidence against the curse doesn't come from a science lab or a chart. It comes from just looking at the lives of the people who should have been target number one. So, what about the people who really should have been the first victims? Well, Lady Evelyn, Lord Carnarvon's own daughter and one of the first women inside, she lived to be 78. Dr. Douglas Deary, the guy who literally performed the autopsy on King Tut's mummy, lived to the ripe old age of 87. And then there's the main man himself, Howard Carter, the man who physically broke the seal, who spent a solid decade cataloging every single treasure, who breathed more of that tomb's air than anyone else on the planet. He lived for another 16 years and died of natural causes at 64. Whenever reporters would hound him about the supposed curse, his answer was always simple and perfect. I am still alive.
So, if there was no curse, then what is the real story here? Well, by pulling apart the myth, we actually uncover a much deeper, much more powerful truth about King Tut's real legacy.
See, you have to understand a core belief the ancient Egyptians had about the afterlife. For them, true death, the final end, only happened when your name was forgotten, when no one spoke it anymore. To speak the name of the dead was to make them live again.
And here's the thing. After his death, Tutankhamun was considered a nobody, a minor pharaoh. The kings who came after him deliberately scrubbed his name from all the records. For 3,000 years, his name went unspoken. He was truly dead. So, Howard Carter's discovery didn't unleash a curse of death, it actually performed an act of resurrection.
The real magic of this whole story isn't some supernatural curse. It's the incredible, world-changing power of discovery. Today, Tutankhamun isn't forgotten. He's the most famous pharaoh in the world. Billions of people know his name. So maybe the final word here doesn't belong to the mythmakers at all. Maybe it belongs to the boy king himself, who, thanks to Howard Carter, can finally say, I am still alive.